Under the pale light of dawn, the mist over Bletchley Park hung like a veil concealing the minds that would soon shape the war's invisible front. It was early 1941, and the grand Victorian mansion in Buckinghamshire stood silent, its windows shuttered, its gardens disturbed only by the crunch of boots on gravel. Inside, rooms once used for tea parties and concerts now hummed with a mechanical pulse. Rows of clattering typewriters, rotary dials, and endless paper reels created a strange symphony, a secret war within the war itself. These were Britain's unseen soldiers, mathematicians, linguists, engineers, and chess champions. Their weapons were logic, wires, and willpower. Their enemy, a cipher machine thought unbreakable. The Enigma in the months after France fell, Britain stood alone, battered but unbroken. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, cutting off convoys and strangling supply lines. The Admiralty estimated that Britain was losing more than 500,000 tons of shipping each month. Each sinking meant less fuel, less food, fewer weapons. The Germans believed their communications were untraceable, their radio messages wrapped in an electric labyrinth no human mind could follow. Every morning, the Luftwaffe, Kriegsmarine, and Wehrmacht transmitted thousands of encrypted orders. Each one pulsed across the airwaves in rhythmic static, 3- and 4-letter groups that made no sense to anyone outside the Reich. British operators intercepted them relentlessly, recording, filing, and forwarding. Yet without a way to decode, it was like staring at the heartbeat of a monster without knowing what it meant. The Enigma machine, in its steel-gray casing, looked deceptively ordinary. But behind its keyboard lay a system of rotating rotors, plugboards, and electrical pathways capable of generating over 150 quintillion possible combinations. Each morning at midnight, the Germans reset the daily key. Rotor positions, plugboard swaps, ring settings, all changed anew. Even if British cryptanalysts somehow solved the code one day, it would all vanish the next. That was the cruel genius of Enigma. Every night at Bletchley, a new war began. Every dawn, their victories were erased. When the first team of Codebreakers arrived, their task seemed impossible. Yet their recruitment was as unconventional as their mission. Cambridge mathematicians, Oxford linguists, crossword champions, people plucked from universities, banks, and even classrooms. The government called it the Government Code and Cipher School, but to those within, it became simply the Park. Every new arrival signed the Official Secrets Act, binding them to silence even among family. Not even the Prime Minister knew the full scale of what was being attempted behind those gates. To the outside world, Bletchley Park did not exist. The battle to break Enigma had begun years earlier, long before Britain declared war. In the 1930s, Polish cryptanalysts led by Marian Rejewski had achieved a breakthrough. Using mathematical permutations and intelligence smuggled from German industry, they built a replica of Enigma and managed to read limited traffic. But as the Germans improved their design, adding more rotors, more plugboard links, the Poles' advantage slipped away. On the eve of invasion in 1939, the Polish Cipher Bureau shared everything they had with the British and French. When Britain went to war, it inherited both a problem and the first fragile clues to its solution. Inside Hut 8, the room assigned to German naval traffic, the air was thick with tension and tobacco smoke. Alan Turing, a young Cambridge mathematician with an awkward gait and a brilliant mind, sat surrounded by stacks of intercepted cipher sheets. He had a theory, a way to use logic machines to test thousands of possible Enigma settings faster than any human could. His machine, later called the Bombe, would be electromechanical, driven by motors, wires, and rotating drums mimicking Enigma's own logic, but running at impossible speed. Turing's designs met skepticism. The British establishment trusted sailors and soldiers, not eccentric academics with half-tied shoelaces and wild ideas about thinking machines. But war had no time for pride. Soon, the first bomb prototype was built at the British Tabulating Machine Company under engineer Harold Keene's supervision. Its wiring supervised by Turing and Gordon Welchman, a fellow mathematician who improved the design with a critical diagonal board. When the machine first powered up, it filled the room with a deep mechanical hum. Dozens of rotors spun simultaneously, clacking like distant gunfire. It was a new kind of weapon, one that fired electrons instead of bullets. The bomb searched through the night, its circuits flickering as it tested key after key. Each result was logged, analyzed, and cross-checked by women of the Women's Royal Naval Service, who worked tirelessly, deciphering the machine's clues into possible Enigma settings. Their shift rotations mirrored combat duty, long hours, sleepless nights, and precision under pressure. Each success saved lives at sea. Still, the enemy adapted. The German Navy, led by Admiral Karl Dönitz, introduced new procedures, extra rotors, more complex plugboard connections, and altered message indicators. Each modification reset the British effort. For weeks at a time, the park went dark, its intercepts useless, its analysts exhausted. Turing's mind raced for new solutions, but his breakthroughs depended on speed. Speed in engineering, speed in computation, and speed in thought. Bletchley Park's electricians and machinists worked without rest, reconfiguring machines and swapping out parts as new Enigma models appeared. The engineers knew that every delay meant more ships lost, more lives taken beneath the Atlantic waves. Yet the real strength of Bletchley Park was not just in its machines, but in its secrecy. No single person knew the full picture. Each hut specialized in a fragment of the puzzle. Naval codes in Hut 8, Army and Air Force traffic in Hut 6, and mechanical operations in Hut 11. Messages were passed by couriers under armed guard, never spoken aloud outside the gates. To keep morale high, supervisors framed their work not as abstract puzzles, but as weapons that could shorten the war. And slowly, as the nights passed, they began to see patterns, fragments of German orders, weather reports, and convoy schedules. It was like glimpsing the shape of an enemy submarine beneath the waves. By late 1941, the Codebreakers began to achieve something remarkable. Each night, before the Germans changed their settings at midnight, they were cracking Enigma again. The impossible machine was being beaten daily by minds and machines working together in secret. They began calling this achievement cribs, predictable German phrases like Heil Hitler or weather forecast that could be used to align their logic tests. What the Germans believed to be flawless precision became their undoing. Their discipline bred predictability, and predictability bred vulnerability. But even as success grew, danger followed. Bletchley's existence was one of the best-kept secrets of the war. If the Germans ever suspected their codes were compromised, they would change everything: rotor sets, procedures, even the machine itself. That would erase months of progress overnight. To protect the secret, British commanders disguised the source of their intelligence as ultra, a vague term inserted into reports to mislead even their own officers. Convoys were rerouted with explanations like aerial reconnaissance or lucky interception. Behind those lies was a truth so powerful it could tilt the entire balance of the war. On those cold nights, as the machines whirred and the air filled with the scent of oil and ozone, the workers of Bletchley Park understood the paradox of their mission. They were winning battles they could never speak of. Their names would appear in no dispatches, and no medals would be pinned on their uniforms. Yet each night they broke Enigma was another day the Royal Navy could fight, another convoy that might reach Britain's shores, and soon, the enemy would start to notice. Messages once believed secure would lead U-boats into traps. German admirals would question their own communications, their confidence faltering. The Enigma's legend of invincibility was beginning to fracture, but the full story of how deep the secret ran, and how Britain's machines learned to outthink the Reich's, was only just beginning. The first true crack in Germany's armored wall of secrecy came not through luck, but through engineering and persistence. By early 1942, Alan Turing's machines had become a permanent fixture of Britain's intelligence network. The bombs were now being produced in quantity, assembled in shadowy workshops by the British Tabulating Machine Company and the Post Office Engineering Department. Each machine stood as tall as a man, with banks of spinning drums and tangled cords. When powered, they filled the air with a low, mechanical growl that echoed through the huts like an approaching storm. Yet behind every machine's hum were people, mathematicians fine-tuning logic paths, engineers repairing motors under dim bulbs, and the wrens who fed cipher strings into the machines hour after hour, their hands blackened by carbon ribbons and graphite dust. Each bomb was designed to mirror the logic of Enigma itself. The rotors turned at synchronized intervals, mimicking the German machine's electrical current, but testing thousands of combinations every second. If one circuit aligned with a possible match, a small light flickered on the control board. Operators would halt the machine, record the finding, and send it for checking. In one sense, this was automation's infancy, human intuition driving mechanical intelligence. The Germans, certain of their machine's perfection, could not imagine that their own logic would be weaponized against them. By mid-1942, Bletchley's workload had grown so vast that Turing and his colleagues requested expansion. The government responded with urgency. A new facility, known simply as Station X, was filled with bombs running day and night. Engineers like Gordon Welchman refined the circuitry, making the machines faster, more resilient to wear, and easier to rewire as new Enigma models appeared. The mechanical strain was enormous. Each bomb's rotating drum spun continuously, generating enough heat to warm an entire hut. Maintenance became a military operation of its own. Technicians swapped bearings, rewound motors, and replaced contacts without rest. The sound of clattering rotors became the heartbeat of an invisible war. Meanwhile, the Germans introduced the M4 Enigma for their U-boat fleet, adding a fourth rotor that threatened to blind Bletchley once more. Convoys in the North Atlantic began to suffer again. Merchant ships carrying food, oil, and ammunition were sunk in devastating numbers. The U-boat packs, coordinated through encrypted signals from Admiral Dönitz headquarters, moved like wolves in the dark. Bletchley's analysts called it the Black Gap, a period when Allied code-breaking fell behind, and the sea itself seemed to swallow men whole. In March 1942, fortune turned. A British destroyer captured the German U-boat U-559 in the Mediterranean after a long chase. As it began to sink, two sailors, Lieutenant Tony Fawson and able seaman Colin Grazier, dived inside the flooding submarine to retrieve codebooks. They passed them up moments before the vessel sank, taking both men with it. The documents contained the latest Enigma key sheets and daily settings. That sacrifice reignited Bletchley's momentum. Using the recovered material, the analysts recalibrated their bombs and once again began reading German naval traffic. Convoys that had been sailing blind could now avoid ambushes. The change was immediate and devastating for the U-boat fleet. Inside Hut 8, the victory was not celebrated with cheers, but with faster work. Every minute mattered. Alan Turing modified his logic to incorporate the new data. Welchman's diagonal board upgrade allowed bombs to skip impossible settings, multiplying their speed. Engineers recalibrated voltage inputs to handle longer operational hours. A small army of mechanics, most of them women, moved between machines tightening screws, oiling axles, and replacing fuses. The synergy between human insight and machine rhythm became almost musical, an unending counterpoint to the chaos raging outside. To sustain this pace, the British government expanded the operation even further. By late 1942, over 7,000 people were employed across multiple sites, each sworn to absolute secrecy. Mathematicians in one hut worked alongside linguists and radio engineers in another. The effort became an industrial process, an intelligence factory producing truth from noise. Each intercepted message passed through a chain, captured by wireless operators, recorded on paper tape, punched into bombs, interpreted by analysts, and distributed to the Admiralty as ultra-intelligence. The system was so efficient that, in some cases, British convoys received alerts about U-boat movements less than 24 hours after the Germans sent them. On the other side, Admiral Dönitz began to notice his submarines were dying in suspicious patterns. Convoys were slipping past kill zones. U-boats found themselves ambushed by destroyers in the middle of the Atlantic. The Kriegsmarine's faith in Enigma began to waver, though no one dared suggest it openly. Dönitz ordered communications protocols rewritten and captains disciplined for careless radio habits. But the problem was not in discipline, it was in mathematics. The Germans had built their empire on the assumption that no machine could outthink Enigma. They had never imagined an entire nation would dedicate itself to proving them wrong. In one critical operation in December 1942, the Battle of the Barents Sea, British forces intercepted German naval orders directing heavy cruisers to destroy an Arctic convoy bound for Murmansk. Thanks to ultra-decrypts, The Royal Navy's small escort group anticipated the attack and turned the trap around. German ships retreated in confusion, their commanders unaware that their own words had betrayed them. That single engagement convinced Hitler that the Kriegsmarine's surface fleet was a liability. He ordered most capital ships withdrawn, handing the Atlantic to submarines alone, a strategic miscalculation, rooted in the belief that Enigma still guarded his communications. Each breakthrough at Bletchley depended on collaboration between minds and machines. Alan Turing's logic, Gordon Welchman's circuitry, and Harold Keene's engineering converged into one relentless rhythm. The operators, mostly women under 30, kept that rhythm steady. They worked in 12-hour shifts, decoding fragments of death and victory. They could not tell anyone, not parents, not lovers, not even other huts, what they were doing. Some later said the silence was its own kind of battle. The weight of knowing lives were being saved by words they could never speak. By 1943, the bombs had become so numerous that new factories were needed. The British Post Office workshops in Birmingham turned into production lines for intelligence machinery. Every completed bomb received a serial number, a final inspection, and a cryptic destination: Bletchley, Eastcote, or Stanmore. Electricians connected miles of cables, and engineers fine-tuned the synchronization to the microsecond. It was the dawn of computational warfare, the birth of an alliance between thought and electricity, and yet, even as Bletchley's success grew, its enemies evolved. German engineers began experimenting with even more secure cipher systems: Lorenz, Geheimschreiber, and other high-level machines intended for the Wehrmacht's top brass. These would require new methods entirely, ones beyond Enigma's architecture. But the lessons learned from Enigma had already reshaped Britain's understanding of war. It was no longer only fought on fields and seas, it was fought in frequencies, in logic, and in silence. AS 1943 gave way to 1944. The nightly cracking of Enigma became routine, yet the stakes only deepened. The Allies were preparing for an invasion of Europe, and ultra-intelligence would be its compass. Every decrypted order, every intercepted weather report, and every false radio transmission carried consequences measured not in numbers, but in lives. The machines kept spinning, the lights kept flickering, and the secret army of thinkers pressed on. They had transformed secrecy into a weapon, turning whispers into victory. But their greatest test, the storm that would decide the fate of Europe, was still ahead. And when it came, the invisible soldiers of Bletchley Park would guide the largest invasion in history. One keystroke at a time. By the spring of 1944, the world outside Bletchley Park trembled with anticipation. The Allied armies were gathering strength across Britain's southern coast, preparing for an assault that would decide the future of Europe. Inside the park, the Codebreakers knew that their nightly victories over Enigma had become more than intelligence work. They were now the invisible architects of D-Day. Every decrypted message carried across their desks was another thread in the web that would ensnare Hitler's defenses in Normandy. Yet still, their silence was absolute. They left for work under the same gray skies, boarded the same guarded buses, and spoke of nothing when they returned. To them, victory was measured in secrecy. Ultra-intelligence, as it was known to those few who had clearance, had grown into the most valuable military secret of the war. The Allies could read much of the German High Command's traffic in near real time. They knew which divisions were in France, which units were being refitted, which ports were mined, and even how many tanks were short of fuel. It was as if the enemy's thoughts were being broadcast nightly in Morse code. But the responsibility was crushing. Every use of Ultra had to be disguised, lest the Germans realize their cipher was compromised. Commanders invented cover stories, scouting planes that had happened to spot convoys and patrols that accidentally stumbled upon supply depots. Behind every such coincidence stood a roomful of exhausted codebreakers, eyes red from sleepless nights, hearts heavy with the burden of knowing what no one could ever say. Among them were minds that would later change the world of science and technology. Alan Turing continued to refine the bombs while secretly working on something even greater: a fully electronic machine that could learn from logic rather than mechanical motion. Others, like Max Newman and Tommy Flowers, built the Colossus, the world's first programmable electronic computer. Colossus wasn't aimed at Enigma, but at the even more complex Lorenz cipher used by the German High Command. With its vacuum tubes, switches, and punch tape readers, Colossus could process data faster than any human or bomb combined. It was the dawn of digital warfare. The machines of Bletchley were no longer just decoding messages. They were redefining the future of intelligence itself. The Germans, meanwhile, were unraveling without knowing why. Admiral Dönitz's U-boat losses mounted to catastrophic levels. Convoys now crossed the Atlantic with growing safety, guided by decrypted reports of submarine positions. On land, German field commanders grew suspicious as Allied forces seemed to anticipate their every move. Tank divisions sent to reinforce one sector found themselves bombed en route. Supply trains vanished under sudden airstrikes. Some officers blamed spies. Others suspected treason. Yet the truth was far beyond their imagination. Their enemy had infiltrated not their ranks but their mathematics. When the invasion of Normandy began on June 6, 1944, Bletchley Park worked at fever pitch. In the final weeks before D-Day, ultra-decrypts had confirmed that the Germans expected the main landings at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The deception plan, Operation Fortitude, depended on that false belief. Through Enigma intercepts, Allied commanders could verify in real time that Hitler's staff still believed the ruse. Even as thousands of ships crossed the channel under the darkened sky, the codebreakers were listening to German confusion spreading hour by hour. Their invisible hand had guided the largest amphibious operation in human history. In the months that followed, the collapse of Nazi communications accelerated. German units retreating across France relied on radio more than ever, and Bletchley's decrypts poured in at unprecedented rates. The Enigma, once the symbol of German invincibility, had become a liability. Captured officers still refused to believe it possible, insisting their codes remained secure. The irony was tragic. The machine that once guaranteed their command structure now delivered their defeat, message by message, into Allied hands. But inside the huts of Bletchley Park, triumph was tempered by exhaustion. The operators worked in stifling heat, surrounded by the roar of fans cooling the bombs and colossi. Papers piled high. Cigarette smoke clung to every surface. There were no parades, no medals, no recognition. Only the next shift, the next code, the next night. Secrecy was Botha's shield and a burden. When victory finally came in May 1945, the celebration at Bletchley was quiet. The staff gathered outside the mansion, listening to Churchill's broadcast declaring peace in Europe. Many wept, not just for joy, but from the release of years of silent tension. They had helped win a war the world would not know they'd fought. When the war ended, the secrecy deepened. The British government ordered all bombs dismantled, their components destroyed or dispersed. The workers were told never to speak of what they had done. For decades, the story of Bletchley Park remained hidden, its veterans forgotten in silence. Alan Turing continued his work on computing, but was persecuted under the same government that once depended on his genius. He died in 1954, his contributions unrecognized until long after his death. Only in the 1970s did the truth begin to surface, revealing how close the war had come to being lost, and how minds armed with mathematics had turned its tide, strategically. The effect of Enigma's defeat was incalculable. The Allied shipping lanes reopened, saving Britain from starvation. The Luftwaffe lost the element of surprise. Field commanders in Africa, Italy, and France faced opponents who seemed omniscient. Historians later estimated that ultra-intelligence shortened the war in Europe by at least 2 years. Psychologically, it shattered the myth of German infallibility and proved that human intellect could pierce even the most intricate machinery of war. The struggle had not been just between armies, but between logics, between faith and secrecy, and the relentless pursuit of understanding. Bletchley Park's legacy lived on in the Cold War that followed. The principles behind Turing's machines inspired the first generation of computers at Manchester and Cambridge. The fusion of human reasoning with electronic processing became the foundation of modern intelligence. Satellites, code-breaking centers, and digital encryption all trace their lineage back to those huts in Buckinghamshire. What began as an act of wartime desperation evolved into a revolution that reshaped civilization itself. Yet for those who had lived through it, the memory was quieter, more personal. They remembered the endless nights, the clatter of rotors, the feel of paper damp with sweat, and the thrill of a light flickering on a control panel signaling that one more secret had been unlocked. They remembered the fear of saying too much and the ache of knowing more than anyone else and being unable to tell a soul. Their war ended without fanfare, but its echoes reached into every corner of the modern world, as one of the veterans later reflected. Long after the secrecy had been lifted, we were never the heroes anyone saw. We were the silence that victory stood upon. It was a sentiment that captured the essence of Bletchley Park, the quiet courage of those who fought with thought instead of bullets, who rewrote the nature of warfare from the shadows in the end. The story of Britain's Codebreakers was not merely one of machines or mathematics, but of faith, faith that knowledge could defeat force, that intellect could overcome fear, and that in the darkest nights of war, the human mind could illuminate the path to freedom.